Hey guys, and welcome to your fourth Robot C tutorial video. In this video, we're going to continue with the theme that we've had in the past few, and that's variables, but in this particular episode, we're going to be testing variables. And so this is extremely useful, and we're starting to really get into some of the core of programming, and that's testing variables and figuring out what their values are at different times so that we could do different things based on different circumstances. So we're going to get into that a little bit here. And the first thing I'm going to introduce to you guys is what's known as an if statement. And so first we need to create a variable. So we're going to create a variable. It's going to be an int. So remember, the first thing we do when we make a variable is declare what kind of variable it's going to be. So in this case, it's an int. So we write int. And then we're going to call this variable number. And we're going to set it equal to 0. So now we're going to get into the if statement. If is the signifying word for if statement. If, and then we need parentheses, and we're going to test the variable number. So if number is equal to 0, and notice I have the double equal sign, and the double equal sign means that we're testing a value or a variable for a value, whereas a single equal sign is just assigning a value to a variable. Here we're testing to see if a variable is equal to a value. And the parentheses signify what we're testing with the if statement. So if, and then it knows that what we're testing in here, what is being done in here is what we're testing. So if number is equal to 0. And the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create some hard brackets, or curly brackets, I should say. They're not really hard, I guess those would be the hard brackets. So some curly braces. And what this does is whatever's within here will only get executed if this statement is true. So if number is equal to 0, we'll do what's in here. Otherwise, we'll just skip right over this. So if our number is equal to 0, let's say we set number equal to 1. So that's just your simple if statement. You can test a variable and then do something with that. And maybe if, you could have multiple lines within here. Let's say we wanted to create another variable, int score equals 1. Score, maybe we're keeping track of the score with our robot, and so we now have 1 point. But the thing you have to be careful about when you're declaring variables inside of braces, if you remember from a couple videos ago, it's that the scope of this variable, where you can use it, is only within these hard braces. So if down here you tried to reference the score variable, you wouldn't be able to. So just something to keep in mind when you're declaring variables with inside of brackets. So we'll get rid of that for now. And so now our number is equal to 1. But let's say we had a loop, some kind of loop, and I'll move this code into here, and this is a while loop. This right here, this while true, and we'll get into what a while loop is in a couple videos. But basically what you need to know with this is it just keeps running this over and over. When it gets to this curly brace here, it goes back to the top. And like I said, I'll explain that in a couple of videos. But so let's say we had this loop and number was equal to 0, and we actually declared this above the loop. So we had a variable number and it was equal to 0. And now number will be applicable within these braces, remember, because it's declared within these braces here, and these braces fall within those braces. So number, the scope of number, it's perfectly cool to use it in here, okay? So while true, if number is equal to 0, then we're setting number equal to 1. So now we run through the code, the computer goes through it, it gets to here, gets to the end of the loop, it jumps back up to the top. If number is equal to 0, it'll test this again, and now our number is equal to 1, so it will not do what's in here. And it'll end here, and then it'll go up to the top, and number will still be 1, and it'll just keep going through that infinitely. Okay, but let's say if number wasn't equal to 0, we wanted to do something else. We can use what's called an else statement. And else means that if whatever we're testing up here isn't true, it'll do this. So we could say else number plus equals 1. So let's say we just wanted to keep increasing the value of number by 1 every time through. So maybe up here, instead of setting number equal to 1, we set it equal to 5, and then every single time we'd keep increasing it through the loop. So if number is equal to 0, number is then equal to 5. But if number is not equal to 0, then it'll increase it by 1. So the first time through the loop, number will be 5. Second time, it'll be 6 and 7, and so forth and so forth. And you don't really have to understand the whole looping concept yet. Like I said, I'll get into that in a couple of videos. But just understand that the basic if statement and then the else statement. That's the big thing. But let's say we wanted, if number got to be 5, we wanted number to then jump back to 0, let's say. So let's say we got rid of this. And if number was equal to 5, then we wanted number to be equal to 0. Okay, so what we have here is an else statement, and we're now testing if number is equal to 0, number is equal to 5. But if number is not equal to 0, if number is equal to 5, then we're going to set number equal to 0. So in this case, number would alternate back and forth between 0 and 5 every time through the loop. Okay? So hopefully that makes a little sense. Now there's some other things you can do with the if statement and the else if statement. Instead of just testing if it's equal to a value, you can test if it's equal to another variable. So let's say we had int, and we'll call this one, I don't know, what are we going to call it? We'll call it counter equals 2. And we could say if number equals counter. So in that case, if the value of number was equal to the value of counter, then we'd do this. And in this case, number is not equal to counter, because 0 does not equal 2, so it wouldn't do this. It would jump to the else statement. And number is not equal to 5, so it would not do what's in here, and it would just, run through that loop infinitely, not doing anything. But what we could do is we could add another else, and we could say if number does not equal, and this is how you signify does not equal, an exclamation mark followed by a single equal sign, does not equal counter, then we could say number equals counter. We could do something like that if we wanted. Okay, so first time through this loop, if number equals counter, it does this if statement, and number 0 counters 2, skips over this. Number doesn't equal 5, skips over this. Else, if number does not equal counter, and this is true, so it does here, it goes into here, number now equals counter, and then so number would be equal to 2 by the time we got down to there. Okay? So you can also test if a variable is less than another variable or is less than a value. So if, let's say we wanted, if number was less than counter, let's say we wanted to do that, you would use the less than sign, and in this case, number is less than counter, number would then be set to 5. And then because this was executed and it came back true, it would skip over the else's, and it would just go straight to here and to the end of that. We could also say, like I was saying, if you wanted it to be less than a value instead of a variable, if number was less than 1 or something like that. And you can also do greater than with the greater than sign, and then same thing, it can be a value or it can be a variable or anything like that. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to want to get into is the or statement and the and statement, okay? And these are applicable for if statements. So let's say we were testing, let's say we wanted to know if number had a value of 0 or if it had a value of 1. Okay, there's a couple different ways we could do that. We could do that with if number equals 0, and then we could say, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, whatever, number equals 10. Let's say we wanted to do that. Well, let's say we could do else if number equals 1, because we said what if number was 0 or 1, we wanted it to be set to 10. Okay, now these, you can see here, whatever's within these particular parentheses, number equal to 10, numbers equal to 10, it's the same thing. And so we can simplify these lines of code here by using an or statement. If number equals 0, oops, and that should have been a double equal sign. Good job if you caught that. And now we can say or, and or are these straight up and down lines. They're not ones, they're the straight up and down lines. It's shift and then the key right above enter. If number equals 1, we would set number equal to 10. We could do that. And now all those lines of code just got simplified into 3. If number is equal to 0, or if number is equal to 1. If this is true, or this is true, number would then be equal to 10. Okay? But let's say we wanted to test, we only wanted number to be equal to 10 if number was 0 and counter was 2. Okay? So we wouldn't use an or statement. Instead, we would use the and statement. And that's 2 of the and signs. And so if counter was equal to 1, I know I said 2, but let's say 1 because, we'll just do that. If number is equal to 0 and counter is equal to 1, then number's now equal to 10. And because counter is equal to 2, even though number is 0, counter doesn't equal 2, this wouldn't get run, it would skip right over to here. Okay? But if counter was 1, then number would get set equal to 10. So the last thing that I want to get into is nested if statements. And so you can have an if statement within an if statement. And so that's kind of where this and comes in. That's really what it is. If you think about it, another way we could do this, instead of using the and, if number is equal to 0, if counter equals 1, then we do this. Okay, and you can see that it really is the same thing, because before we had the only way that it would set numbers equal to 10 if both number was 0 and counter was 1. And in this case, it's really that same thing. If number is equal to 0, then we go to the next line, and if counter is equal to 1, then number gets set to 10. If counter up here was 2, the number would be 0. It's cool. It would go that. It would go to here, and it would test, and it would see that counter is equal to 2. It wouldn't do this, and it would skip to the end of that. So you could have some else statements in here. Else if counter equals 2. I don't know why I keep missing the end parentheses. You could do this. Oops. And notice how I'm lining up my braces so that they line up together, so it's easier to see. This brace lines up with that one, and that one lines up with that one, so their indentation is all the same. If counter is equal to 0, then I'll say we want a number to be equal to 10 or 20, because it's already 10. So what this would do, if number equals 0, that's true. If counter is equal to 1, it's not, so it'll skip over this. Else, if counter is equal to 2, and this else refers to the if that's directly preceding it. Or so in terms of, like, it kind of lines up with the indentation, but indentation doesn't really matter. It's just for legibility's sake. So I don't want to say that lines up with the if that's indented with it, because this else would still line up with that. But it's the one that precedes it directly in terms of the brackets. So in this case, this else would refer to this. If we went like this, though, then this else would refer up to that if. Okay, so hopefully that made some sense. So in this case, number is equal to 0, we're good. Counter, if we're testing if it's equal to 1, it's not, it's equal to 2. So else if counter equals 2, number gets up to 20. And so we're good there. Let's say we change this, just to make sure you guys understand it. We said number is equal to 5. Right here, if we test if number is equal to 5, it's not, it's equal to 0, so we'd skip over all this in here and none of that would get executed. Okay, so that's just a brief introduction to if statements, else statements, and then the and operator and the or operator with ints. And there's other ways you can do that. You can do it with doubles. Doubles work just fine, or floats, basically any number you can use. But you can also do booleans as well. And so you can say if you had a boolean, bool test equals false, and you can say if test equals false, and then you could do all that. Or if test was equal to true, you could do that. You know, so in this case, none of this would get executed because test is false and true does not equal false. But you could do that does not equal true, which would not true is false. Okay, and there's a little bit of shorthand you can do with booleans that you can't do with ints or anything else. If you wanted to test if something was true, okay, you could write it out like this, but you could also totally get rid of all that and just say if test. And by default, if you just say if test, then it tests to see if it was true. So if test means if test is equal to true, and in this case it's false, so it would skip over all that. But if test was true, we'd say if test, and test is true, so we'd go in here. If counter equals 1, which counter does not equal 1, we'd skip over this. Else, if counter equals 2, counter does equal 2, number would then get set to 20. Okay, so I know that was kind of a lot in this video, but hopefully it made some sense and you understood where I'm coming from with the if statements and the else statements and testing booleans and ints and doubles and all that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.